Growing up, my name was Leah, and for more than 30 years I lived in the long, unrelenting shadow of my older sister, Amelia. No matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, my efforts were always measured against hers and found lacking. To my parents, she was the radiant daughter, the one who deserved attention, praise, and celebration. I was the practical one, the capable one, the daughter who managed on her own without needing their constant reinforcement. They never knew that while they poured their energy into lifting up Amelia's very ordinary accomplishments, I was quietly building something extraordinary. By the time I reached my early 30s, I had created a fortune of $15 million entirely on my own, yet they still saw me as the daughter with the modest life. All of that, every carefully hidden detail, burst into the open during one unforgettable Thanksgiving dinner, when years of secrecy and buried hurt collided across the family table. The story really begins much earlier than that moment of revelation. I want you to picture the neighborhood where I grew up, a quiet suburb outside of Boston. From the outside, our family looked picture perfect. My father, Richard, worked steadily as an insurance adjuster, the kind of man who ironed his shirts every morning and carried a thermos of coffee to the office. My mother, Helen, taught third grade at the local elementary school. She loved crafts, bulletin board displays, and telling people she was shaping young minds. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial with shutters painted blue and a swing set in the backyard. To our neighbors, we were the stable family who mowed the lawn on Saturday mornings and waved politely at block parties. Inside those walls, though, the balance of love and attention was never equal. Amelia was born 2 years before me, and from the beginning she was the golden child. Family photo albums tell the story better than words ever could. Amelia's milestones filled page after page: her first smile, her first steps, her first dance recital. My milestones, when recorded at all, were squeezed onto the blank corners of her story. I remember flipping through those albums as a child and realizing my life seemed to exist only as a footnote in hers. That realization shaped me in ways my parents could never have understood. Favoritism showed itself in countless small moments that accumulated into something heavy. When Amelia began dance lessons at 6, my parents went to every single recital, sitting in the front row with bouquets of flowers. They filled our living room shelves with her trophies and photos, the whole space becoming a shrine to her hobby. The summer I won the state science fair at 12, they skipped the ceremony because Amelia had a dance competition the same day. My certificate was placed in a drawer in my bedroom, forgotten almost immediately. I learned early that my interests and accomplishments would always rank second, if they ranked at all. Holidays revealed the divide most clearly. One Christmas, when Amelia was 14, she unwrapped a delicate white gold necklace with a sapphire pendant. I opened a box of heavy books about famous scientists. It wasn't that I disliked science. In fact, I loved it. But the message was clear: Amelia deserved beauty and sparkle, while I was expected to be practical. Even the rules in our house were written differently for each of us. When Amelia broke curfew, she was gently sat down and encouraged to make better choices. When I did the same thing, I was grounded for weeks and given extra chores. Neighbors noticed the double standard. I felt it every day in the way my parents responded to us. Even our bedrooms told the story. Amelia's space was redecorated every few years to match her changing tastes: ballerinas, then teen pop stars, then a sophisticated retreat with a vanity and pastel drapes. My room, pale yellow with basic furniture, never changed. When I asked to paint my walls dark blue, my mother told me there wasn't money for unnecessary changes. 2 weeks later, Amelia received a full bedroom makeover as a surprise. I realized that if I wanted any recognition, I would have to earn it through academics. Amelia was an average student who excelled socially, while I drove myself to perfection. Straight A's, academic clubs, competitions, late nights studying until my eyes blurred, those were my lifelines. When I succeeded, my parents gave distracted nods and quick remarks like, "That's nice, Leah, but don't you want to try something fun, like your sister?" The constant dismissal could have crushed me. Instead, it built something else: independence. By 13, I no longer looked to them for validation. I learned to cook, managed my own schedule, and arranged my own rides to competitions. Amelia leaned on them for everything well into high school, but I already understood how to stand alone. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother, Evelyn, my father's mother. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been an accountant when few women worked in finance. She noticed my hunger to be understood. During our weekly visits, she asked about my interests and listened like my answers mattered. One afternoon, as we baked cookies together, she asked if I knew what compound interest was. When I admitted I didn't, she pulled out paper and explained how money could grow over time. That moment lit a spark in me that never went out. Over the next few years, she taught me everything she knew about investing, saving, and the quiet power of financial independence. She told me something that became the foundation of my life. True wealth isn't about showing off. The richest people are rarely the loudest in the room. That wisdom shaped the choices I made as I grew older. By the time I graduated high school as valedictorian, I had already promised myself one thing: someday I would create a life so successful, so undeniable, that my parents would have no choice but to see me. But even then, I wondered if their recognition would matter by the time it finally came. Continue. College marked the moment when the differences between Amelia's life and mine became impossible to ignore. While she headed off to a private university with tuition costing more than $40,000 a year, I enrolled at the state university on a full academic scholarship I had earned through years of hard work. The contrast between our send-offs was almost theatrical. My parents bought Amelia new furniture, a coordinated bedding set, a laptop, and every convenience she could possibly need. They drove 6 hours to help her move in, staying the weekend to make sure she felt at home. For me, there was no fanfare. My father dropped me off with 2 suitcases and a box of mismatched supplies. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "You'll figure it out, Leah. You always do. Call if you absolutely need something." Within 20 minutes, he was back in the car, rushing home to help my mother put together a care package for Amelia, who was already homesick after just 2 weeks away. That set the tone for the next 4 years. When I called home to share good news, like earning a perfect grade point average my first semester, the response was lukewarm. My mother said, "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Amelia was invited to join the best sorority on campus?" Each conversation tilted toward Amelia's social life, her adventures, her struggles. My achievements were acknowledged with passing nods, as though they were expected, unremarkable. Meanwhile, my parents covered every expense for Amelia's education, tuition, rent, even a monthly allowance, while I worked 3 jobs just to afford groceries and rent. I worked mornings at the campus coffee shop, weekends at the library, and nights tutoring other students in economics. Despite the exhaustion, I kept my grades perfect and started standing out to my professors. One professor in particular, Dr. Matthews, changed my trajectory. He taught financial analysis and had a sharp eye for talent. After class one day, he asked me to stay behind. "Leah, I've been teaching for 25 years, he said, leaning against his desk. "Your ability to read markets is rare. Have you thought about where you want to take this?" That question opened doors I didn't know existed. Dr. Matthews became my mentor, introducing me to industry contacts and recommending me for competitive internships. The summer after my junior year, I landed a coveted internship at a respected investment firm in New York, working directly under a senior strategist. While Amelia spent the summer backpacking across Europe with money from our parents, I was in a high-rise office, soaking up everything I could about market analysis, emerging technologies, and risk management. But my greatest influence remained my grandmother Evelyn. She passed away suddenly during my senior year, and losing her was like losing the only person who had ever truly believed in me. At the funeral, my parents were polite but detached, not understanding the depth of my grief. A month later, I received a letter from her attorney. She had left me her entire savings, $50,000. My parents were shocked, expecting her modest estate to be divided evenly. Over dinner one evening, my father suggested I share it with Amelia, who was considering graduate school. My mother chimed in. "Your sister has expensive dreams, Leah. You'll be fine on your own, as always." For the first time in my life, I said no without hesitation. That inheritance was mine, a final act of faith from the one person who had always supported me. I invested every penny, exactly as she had taught me, and it became the seed of the fortune I would eventually build. After graduation, I accepted a position at a major financial firm in New York. The salary was modest by city standards, but the potential for growth was immense. I shared a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, lived frugally, and invested half of every paycheck. I gained a reputation for spotting opportunities others overlooked. While colleagues focused on traditional markets, I dug into emerging technologies and sustainable energy companies long before they became mainstream. At 26, I saved enough to take a leap of faith. I left my job and founded my own investment firm, giving it a neutral name so no one would guess a young woman was behind it. I targeted undervalued companies with innovative ideas, especially those led by women. My first big success came when I invested heavily in a biotech startup that developed a groundbreaking diagnostic tool. When it was acquired, my initial investment multiplied tenfold. By 27, I was a millionaire. For years, I kept my family at arm's length, offering them only the version of me they expected, the steady, unremarkable daughter who worked in finance. I built an alternate identity for family gatherings, complete with vague answers and modest clothing. I never spoke of my company, never posted about it online, never gave them any reason to look closer. To them, Amelia was still the star, praised endlessly for her creativity and charm despite her average career. I became so practiced in hiding the truth that it almost felt natural. Yet behind that mask, my company grew into a thriving boutique firm with 15 employees and more than $200 million under management. By 30, my personal net worth reached $5 million. By 32, it tripled to $15 million. I had apartments with sweeping city views, designer clothing I never wore around my family, and invitations to exclusive industry events. And still, at home, I was just Leah who worked with spreadsheets. The reason I kept it secret was simple. I knew my parents would not celebrate me. They would see me only as a source of money for Amelia. I also feared being valued solely for my wealth after decades of being dismissed. The thought of finally earning their attention only because of money made me feel sick. My success was mine alone, built without their encouragement or support, and I protected it fiercely. But hiding came at a cost. By the time I met Michael, a successful architect who would become my partner, I had perfected the art of splitting myself in two. He was the first person to challenge me, asking why I hid my true life from my family. His question lingered in my mind until Thanksgiving approached, and I decided it was time to stop hiding, no matter the consequences. Continue. The drive back to Boston that Thanksgiving felt heavier than any trip I had made in years. Michael sat beside me, his calm presence a steadying force, yet my stomach twisted with anticipation. I had decided not to stage any dramatic revelations, only to stop pretending. I would be honest if asked and no longer downplay who I was. As we turned onto my parents' street, I spotted Amelia's new luxury car gleaming in the driveway, a reminder of how even in her 30s she still leaned on our parents' finances. I parked a few houses down, hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Showtime," I muttered. Michael gave me a reassuring smile, and we walked toward the house carrying a wrapped package, a sleek new television I had bought as a gift. Modest compared to what I could afford, but far nicer than anything I had given before. The moment we stepped through the front door, the old family rhythm reappeared. My mother rushed past me to greet Michael, delighted to meet the architect she had heard about. My father gave me a distracted pat on the shoulder before calling out for Amelia. She entered as if stepping onto a stage, her hair freshly styled, her makeup perfect, her hug brief and perfunctory. She turned immediately to Michael, sizing him up with approval. While he handled the introductions gracefully, I glanced around the living room. New photographs of Amelia and her husband covered the mantel, while a single framed picture of me as a child sat tucked onto a side table, barely noticeable. Dinner that night showcased the same pattern I had lived with all my life. My mother had prepared Amelia's favorite dishes, even the labor-intensive Swedish meatballs that took hours to make. Conversation revolved around Amelia's recent promotion to senior marketing manager, complete with dramatic hand gestures and stories about her new office. My parents beamed with pride, interrupting to offer financial help if she needed to upgrade her wardrobe to match her new role. When dessert arrived, my mother finally turned to me. "And how's your job going, Leah? Still doing this spreadsheet thing?" Before I could answer, Amelia laughed, reminding everyone that I had always hated attention and would never know what to do with the promotion. Later that night, Michael and I were given the lumpy pull-out sofa in the small guest room, while Amelia and her husband were placed in the larger suite. When I mentioned it, my mother explained gently, "Your sister has back problems, dear, and you've always been less fussy." Thanksgiving morning brought another blow. As I came down the hallway, I overheard my parents in the kitchen. "I just don't understand why Leah hasn't gone further in her career." My mother sighed. "She was always good with numbers." My father replied, "Some people just don't have ambition. Not like Amelia, always striving for more." Amelia chimed in dramatically. "Honestly, I feel bad for her sometimes. Michael seems far too successful for her. I give it 6 months before he realizes she's not at his level." I froze, their words cutting into me like they had so many times before. Michael found me there, silent tears on my cheeks, and whispered, "At some point, Leah, don't you want them to know who you really are?" Later that day, while helping in the kitchen, I stepped outside to take a business call. A deal worth millions was being finalized, and my input was essential. I spoke confidently about returns and strategy, unaware that Amelia had followed me. When I ended the call, she was standing by the door, suspicion written across her face. "Who was that?" she demanded. Sounded a little intense for someone who just checks spreadsheets. I brushed past her, but I knew the fragile walls of my facade were beginning to crack. That evening, as Michael casually mentioned our upcoming trip to Tokyo for one of my clients, Amelia's eyes narrowed. The inconsistencies between my supposed modest career and the truth were piling up. I felt the tension tightening like a rope around my throat. Dinner that evening started pleasantly enough. The table was set with embroidered linens and my grandmother's china, the turkey roasted to golden perfection. Conversation flowed, centered as always on Amelia and her husband's plans for their future. My parents asked eagerly about grandchildren, squeezing Amelia's hand with glowing faces. No one asked if I might want children of my own. Michael caught my eye across the table, his smile encouraging me to hold steady. As the meal wound down, I presented the wrapped television. My parents looked surprised as they unwrapped it, their confusion clear. "This must have cost a fortune," my mother whispered. "How can you afford something like this?" Amelia, quick as ever, pulled out her phone to check the model. $1,500, she announced loudly. "Since when can you afford gifts like this on your little analyst's salary?" I felt Michael's hand on my knee, grounding me. For the first time, I didn't retreat. I told them I had simplified things before. The truth was that I owned my own investment firm, and it had grown significantly. A heavy silence fell. Amelia searched frantically on her phone, then slammed it down on the table. "Leah Warren, CEO of a boutique investment firm managing over $200 million, she read, her voice rising. Featured in business magazines, named one of New York's most influential women, and worth $15 million. She stared at me with disbelief that twisted into fury. "All these years you let us think you were struggling, while I had to beg Mom and Dad for help. How selfish can you possibly be?" Her outburst shattered the room. My father sat frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth. My mother trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Amelia raged on, accusing me of hoarding wealth while the family struggled. For years, They had dipped into retirement to help her with car payments and vacations, while I supposedly scraped by. "What kind of person hides money from her own family?" she demanded. I rose slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I'll tell you what kind of person I am. I am the daughter whose accomplishments were ignored while your recitals were treated like Broadway. I am the sister who received second-hand clothes while you got new ones. I am the child whose graduation speech went unseen because everyone was busy filming you. And I am the woman who built a company from nothing, with no help, no encouragement, and no pride from her own family." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother sobbed, my father stared in shock, and Amelia's face twisted with indignation. "This isn't about childhood jealousy," she snapped. "This is about family obligation. You owe us." I looked at her calmly. "I don't owe anyone anything. I earned this. Just as you never earned the attention you were given, it was simply handed to you." Michael, who had stayed silent until then, finally spoke. "From what I've seen today, Leah has been giving to this family her entire life. Maybe it's time someone gave something back, like respect." Amelia turned on him, her anger blazing, but I stood. "We're leaving," I said, my voice resolute. The meal was unfinished, the pumpkin pie untouched, but my truth had finally been laid bare. "Continue." The night air outside felt like freedom as Michael and I walked away from the house, though my chest still burned with the intensity of what had just unfolded. We drove to a nearby hotel, the silence in the car heavy but not uncomfortable. Once inside our room, I collapsed onto the bed, alternating between laughter and disbelief. "I cannot believe that just happened," I whispered, shaking my head. Michael ordered room service, poured me a glass of wine, and told me I had handled myself with grace, even when Amelia had dissolved into a tantrum. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. The secret I had carried so carefully was out, and though the fallout had been chaotic, there was relief in no longer pretending. Morning brought a storm of messages. Amelia had sent nearly 20 texts overnight, swinging wildly between anger, apology, entitlement, and guilt. My mother left tearful voicemails, pleading for me to return and work this out as a family. Even Amelia's husband texted, awkwardly apologizing for the scene. My father, however, remained silent. As I showered, a knock came at the door. Michael opened it to find my father standing in the hallway, looking as if he had not slept at all. He asked quietly if he could speak with me. I wrapped myself in a hotel robe and sat across from him, unsure what to expect. For a long moment, he simply stared at his hands. Then he whispered, $15 million. I can't wrap my head around it. I braced myself for anger or demands, but instead he said something I had never imagined hearing. "It's not about the money. It's about how we treated you. We got it wrong." Those words pierced me deeper than Amelia's rage ever could. My father admitted that he and my mother had always taken the path of least resistance, giving Amelia more because she demanded more, and leaving me to fend for myself because I was capable. He confessed to moments he remembered with shame, like the science fair I had won at 10, where we left early because Amelia was bored. "I was proud of you, Leah," he said, his voice breaking, "but I never told you. And I can see now how many times I did that." I listened in silence, tears streaming down my face, both moved and wary. Would he have said this if I were not wealthy? Would recognition only come when there was proof of success they could no longer ignore? When I asked, he had no answer. By late morning, my father received a call from my mother. She and Amelia were at the house, insisting we all meet again to talk things through. Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "You don't owe them another confrontation," he said gently. I considered walking away, returning to New York, and leaving the mess behind. But part of me still longed for closure, for the chance to set boundaries once and for all. "I think I need to finish this," I told him. Back at the house, my mother rushed forward as though nothing had happened, arms outstretched. I stepped back, keeping distance. "Let's just talk," I said firmly. Amelia sat on the couch, her eyes puffy from crying but her posture still defiant. She began with a rehearsed apology, claiming shock and hurt at discovering my wealth. But almost immediately, the conversation turned to what she believed I owed. She argued that I should help her and Brad buy a house, that I should ensure our parents retired comfortably, that sharing was what family meant. I countered calmly, pointing out the years she had accepted support from them while I managed alone. If Mom and Dad needed help with medical bills or to keep their home, that would be different, I said. But you don't want support, you want access to a life you haven't earned. The room grew tense as Amelia's frustration boiled over. She accused me of destroying the family, of being greedy and cold. My mother pleaded for peace, insisting she had loved us both equally, though she struggled to name a single time she had celebrated my accomplishments the way she had Amelia's. My father sat quietly, shame written across his face. After an hour of circular arguments, nothing was resolved. Michael and I gathered our things once more. As we reached the car, my father followed. His voice was low and raw. "I'm sorry, Leah. For everything. For 30 years of getting it wrong." I wanted to believe him, but the wound was too deep to heal in a single conversation. I nodded, unable to find words, and we drove away, back toward New York, 3 days earlier than planned. The long drive gave Michael and me time to process. "Most people would have either given in or burned every bridge," he said quietly. "You stood your ground without losing yourself." I sighed, unsure whether the bridges were intact at all. "Maybe some things aren't meant to survive," I admitted. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." He reminded me that family should lift you up, not tear you down. And for the first time, I began to believe that maybe the family we choose could matter more than the one we are born into. The days that followed were a blur of calls and messages. My parents reached out daily, shifting from defending Amelia to slowly acknowledging their role in creating the dynamic that had hurt me for so long. My father, in particular, seemed genuinely reflective, telling me he was proud not because of the money, but because I had built something remarkable without their support. My mother struggled more, often retreating to the refrain that "we loved you both equally," or that Amelia had needed more. Amelia herself was relentless, swinging between insults and guilt trips, then finally spreading her version of events to extended family. Suddenly cousins and distant relatives I barely knew were contacting me, some to shame me, others to ask for favors now that they knew about my wealth. I ignored them all, deleting their messages. Their responses only confirmed why I had kept my success hidden for so long. Continue. 6 months passed, and the chaos of that Thanksgiving began to settle into something resembling clarity. The initial storm of calls and messages had died down, though Amelia still managed to send the occasional bitter text before I finally blocked her number. My parents, meanwhile, had shifted into a different kind of relationship with me, less frequent, more deliberate, and, for the first time, tinged with honesty. My father made genuine efforts to ask about my life and my work. "I truly didn't understand what you were building," he admitted one evening on the phone. "I just assumed finance meant pushing papers somewhere. I'm sorry I never asked." Hearing those words, halting and full of regret, was both healing and painful. My mother, however, still struggled. She often circled back to Amelia, lamenting the rift between us and suggesting that a financial gesture might mend things. I was firm with her each time. Our relationship was broken long before money entered the picture. I will not buy a sisterhood that never really existed. Therapy became my anchor during this period. I began seeing Dr. Harrison, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. She helped me untangle the years of neglect, favoritism, and secrecy that had defined my life. "Your success disrupted a system that was built on fixed roles," she explained. "You were always the self-sufficient child. Amelia was the needy one. Your parents believed their job was to pour resources where they thought the need was greatest. But when you revealed your wealth, you shattered those roles. The family system destabilized, and everyone panicked." Her words helped me see that the explosion at Thanksgiving wasn't just about money, it was about identity, about roles that no longer fit. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how to move forward. One of the first steps was setting clear boundaries. I wrote an email to my entire family, outlining them in simple terms. I would not discuss my finances. I would not provide money for Amelia's lifestyle. I would only attend gatherings where my accomplishments and personhood were respected equally. The responses varied. My father called to tell me he understood, his voice heavy with remorse but also with pride. My mother cried, insisting that we loved you both, while still pressing me to reconsider. Amelia responded with venom, accusing me of destroying the family and calling me selfish. I blocked her number the same day, and for the first time in my life, I felt immediate relief. Silence from her was a gift I hadn't known I needed. Even with the mess, I made one financial decision about family. I established an educational trust fund for Amelia's children, my niece and nephew, to cover their college expenses. The trust was locked so Amelia couldn't access it for anything else. When I told my parents, my father's gratitude was sincere. "That's incredibly generous, Leah, especially after everything," he said. "I love those kids," I told him simply. Their futures shouldn't be limited by the mistakes of adults. It wasn't about Amelia, it was about breaking the cycle, giving the next generation a chance at opportunities I had to fight for alone. Through all of this, my relationship with Michael deepened. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, standing in my parents' dining room with years of frustration pouring out, and he had stood beside me without flinching. 6 months after Thanksgiving, during a weekend trip to the mountains, he proposed. The ring he offered was vintage, an emerald set in delicate gold, perfectly understated yet beautiful. I said yes without hesitation. That night, as we lay in bed, he asked if I imagined us having children someday. The thought, once distant, suddenly felt real. "I think so," I replied. "But we'll do it differently. We'll love each child for exactly who they are, not who needs us most." In many ways, the most profound healing came from realizing that my worth was never tied to my family's recognition. For decades, I had sought validation from people who could not give it. But after that Thanksgiving, after the therapy, after the boundaries, I finally began to understand that my value had always existed within me. Money had revealed character flaws in others, but it had also freed me. It was no longer about proving myself or hiding success. It became about what I could create with it. I began mentoring young women in finance, offering both knowledge and sometimes seed funding. I donated more generously, supporting organizations that gave girls the tools to build futures of independence. The joy of helping others build their dreams far outshone the hollow satisfaction of accumulating wealth in silence. By the time the next Thanksgiving approached, I no longer carried the weight of secrecy. My story had shifted from one of hiding to one of owning my truth. I knew my family might never fully understand me, and Amelia would likely never forgive me for breaking the illusion that she was the star. But I had stopped needing their recognition. My chosen family, Michael, my friends, the women I mentored lifted me up in ways my parents never had. I was no longer the girl overlooked in photo albums or the daughter who received practical gifts instead of jewelry. I was a woman who had stepped out of her sister's shadow and into her own light, and that was a story worth telling. Continue. The year that followed became a period of rebuilding, not just of relationships, but of my own understanding of self. For so long, I had lived in reaction to my family's neglect, pushing myself to achieve in hopes of being noticed. Now, stripped of the illusion that recognition from them would ever satisfy me, I found myself freer than I had ever been. That freedom allowed me to redirect my energy into areas that truly mattered: my relationship with Michael, my friendships, my work, and my own sense of peace. Thanksgiving had once symbolized dread for me, a reminder of how invisible I felt in my own family. But as the holiday drew near again, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I no longer needed to contort myself into a role that fit their expectations. Instead, I spent the day surrounded by friends, my chosen family. We cooked together in my apartment, laughter spilling into the hallways, the aroma of roasted vegetables and pies filling the air. At the table, there was no golden child, no overlooked sibling, only people who valued me for who I was. It wasn't the picture-perfect Thanksgiving my parents had always tried to stage, but it was real. And for me, that was worth more than any staged family portrait. Still, the lessons of my past lingered. Therapy helped me see that the years of being overlooked had carved resilience into me, but also scars. There were days when I felt anger rise unbidden, memories of being sidelined flashing through my mind. Dr. Harrison reminded me that healing wasn't linear. "It's not about erasing the pain," she said during one session. "It's about learning to carry it differently." Those words stayed with me. I began journaling, recording both the painful memories and the victories that followed. Writing helped me process not just what I had lost, but also what I had built. Slowly, I learned to see my childhood not only as a story of neglect, but also as the forge that created my determination. Michael and I built new traditions together. We spent weekends exploring the city, planning a wedding that reflected us rather than anyone else's expectations. He encouraged me to share my story more openly, and though I was hesitant at first, I found that speaking about my journey resonated deeply with others. Women approached me at conferences and workshops, telling me they too had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Sharing my truth gave them hope. I realized that my story wasn't just about me, it was about resilience, independence, and the power of choosing your own worth. Meanwhile, the dynamic with my parents settled into something quieter. My father continued to reach out, slowly piecing together the relationship he had neglected for decades. His voice often carried regret, but also a tentative pride that felt genuine. My mother remained more complicated. She still spoke of Amelia often, her words laced with sadness at the growing distance. I listened politely, but I refused to be pulled into her guilt. I had drawn my boundaries, and I held them firm. Amelia, for her part, had all but disappeared from my life, her final message a scathing condemnation that I refused to carry. Her silence, once it became permanent, felt like closure. Money itself transformed in my eyes during that year. For so long, it had been my secret validation, proof that I was more than my family ever acknowledged. But as time passed, I stopped seeing it as a shield and began seeing it as a tool. I invested in people and projects that mattered to me. I helped young entrepreneurs launch ideas that could change industries. I supported programs that opened doors for girls who, like me, were told to be practical instead of daring. With every investment in others, I felt the bitterness of my past soften. I was no longer just the overlooked daughter. I was someone who could turn pain into possibility for others. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about wealth at all. It was about truth. Hiding had cost me years of emotional energy, years spent splitting myself in two. Revealing my success, though messy, freed me. It forced my family to confront the roles they had written for me, and it forced me to confront the truth that their validation was not what I needed. My worth had never been theirs to grant. It had always been mine to claim. As I prepared to step into marriage with Michael, I carried that truth like a compass. We talked often about the kind of parents we wanted to be, the kind of family we wanted to create. "We'll love each child for who they are," I told him one evening as we watched the city lights from our balcony. "Not for who demands the most, or who fits some idea of perfection. We'll love them equally, fully, and without condition." Michael kissed my hand and said softly, "That's why you'll be an incredible mother." His faith in me healed wounds my parents never had. My story began in the shadow of my sister, defined by silence and neglect. But it grew into something far greater, a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of independence, and the freedom of owning your truth. I may always carry the echoes of being overlooked, but they no longer define me. I am not simply the girl who was dismissed. I am the woman who built her own light, and that light shines brighter than the shadow ever could.